If you're thinking about a new camera, then watch this video because I'm going to be explaining the key differences between DSLR and mirrorless cameras so that you can avoid buyer's regret and get the right camera that fits you. Digital cameras changed the market because they introduced a camera that could make digital files instead of using film. They called it the Digital Single Lens Reflex Camera, or DSLR. Now this technology consists of a camera, a lens, a mirror, and a sensor inside behind that mirror. Now, what you see when you look inside of your viewfinder is the image coming inside of your lens, hitting a series of mirrors and then coming through to the viewfinder, which is what you're looking at. However, when you're ready to take a photo, what happens is when you press that shutter, that internal mirror has to move out of the way to record that file on the digital sensor and create a digital file, either a RAW file or a JPEG file. Now, the mirrorless camera is special because it removed that mirror from the equation, and when you open the camera, all you see is the sensor inside of it. Thus, removing the mirror rendered it a mirrorless camera. Now, I'll get into how removing that mirror impacts the performance later on in this video. Now, when you remove something from the camera itself, what happens is you're removing a component and not replacing it with anything else. That reduces the size and the actual weight of the camera. That's a pretty big deal when we're talking about APS-C sensors or smaller sensor cameras like this one, because you can see how thin and how small this camera is. Thinner and smaller cameras also meanders its way over into the lens game, and mirrorless lenses are actually smaller and more compact than some of your DSLR lenses are. Now, the size of the cameras is a pretty big deal for these crop sensor or APS-C sensor cameras, but when we talk about the larger full frame format cameras like the ones that I have on my shelf back here, they're still pretty bulky bodies. So I don't think that's a huge difference there when we're talking about full frame cameras, because the bodies are still pretty comparable to the DSLR bodies, but they are a little bit more compact because they remove that sensor. In just a second, I'm going to tell you about the performance of DSLR versus mirrorless cameras, plus some problems that you may encounter when you're looking at that switch. But first, I want to tell you about LPU Plus. Now, we're talking about cameras in this video, and you want to be sure you know how to use your camera and how to take great photos with it. With LPU Plus, it's the only platform online where you can stream unlimited landscape photography courses for under $10 a month. You'll learn anything from how to use your camera all the way to how to compose the best shots like a pro. You can learn to take the best photos of your life for cheaper than a fancy coffee. Now, removing this mirror in a DSLR camera also impacts the performance of a mirrorless camera. If you remember how DSLR cameras work, that image has to come into the camera, and that camera then has to move the mirror up to actually see the sensor and then record that file onto the sensor itself to create a digital photo. That takes a lot of time to raise this mirror up and down every single time you're taking a photo. So this camera can take photos of maybe somewhere between 3 to 5 frames per second. Now, when we're talking about removing that mirror from a camera and you just have a sensor that can record rapidly images inside of the mirrorless sensor, now we're talking about removing that movement inside the camera so you can record images faster and put them into your image file faster. Now, whereas the DSLR could take about 3 to 5 photos per second, this camera can actually take over 11 frames per second just because you're removing that mirror from the element. This is extremely beneficial when you're talking about wildlife photography or sports photography because you want rapid photos per second to record all of the action and take sequences of action photos so that you never miss a shot. Your performance with these two cameras also increases too because you're not having to carry around a larger camera body with this one. You're actually carrying around this very small, compact body, and carrying less weight and gear in your bag is a big deal. Now, there are some problems when we're talking about mirrorless cameras versus DSLR cameras. When you're changing lenses like I'm doing right now and have my lens off of this camera, what happens is that mirror actually kind of protects your sensor from any dust or elements. Now, there's still dust that gets inside of this camera, but not so much as would happen if you're using as a mirrorless camera. With a mirrorless camera, you have no mirror to protect the sensor when you're changing out your lenses, and that's not the obligation of the mirror, but it is something that happens. Now, I've had more dust and debris and water get on my image sensors, and I have to clean them all the time. Now, speaking of cleaning, this DSLR camera is very difficult to clean because you have to raise that mirror up, keep it raised up while you're cleaning the sensor, and try not to bump it around or do anything with it. Now, with this camera here, it's very easy to clean because that sensor is just right up front. So even though I have to clean it more, it's easier to clean this camera than DSLR models. Now, if you want to learn how to use these cameras best, click or tap this video showing up on your screen right now.